Hey there folks, and welcome back to the Gunners Guild. Pardon my echo, I just moved and I don't have any furniture, so deal with it. Anyway, today in Remnant 2, we're going to be showcasing a melee build, because every other build I want to do right now is going to get some bug fixes and changes in the upcoming patch, so I kind of have to wait to do any like mod builds or Archon builds and skill stuff right now. But for now, let's talk about the seldom used melee build here in Remnant 2. And yeah, don't worry, melee can hang. So the melee build I'm running here is a crit stacking build, because of course, damage multipliers. I'm using Alchemist and Challenger here for fairly obvious reasons. Alchemist's Frenzy Dust provides us with 20% melee attack speed, which is outstanding, and that's a multiplicative modifier. The Alchemist also provides us with extra concoctions to use, which are very nice to fill out the build. I'm using Armor Encumbrance, Life Regen, and the 6.66% Life Stamina Movement Speed concoctions, but you're free to shuffle those around to fit whatever you need. I want to use Invader with this build rather than Alchemist, and I will probably do a follow-up video with Invader Challenger, but currently Invader's Shark perk does not work. So I'm going to be losing out on a lot of damage and some crit, so no bueno. But regardless, Challenger is the obvious second archetype for this build just because of the Rampage skill, which is just crazy. 50% melee damage, stagger resistance, melee attack speed, like, yeah, okay, I'll take that. Like, nothing else really matters except that skill, but I mean, it's also nice you just get 35% damage on top. You can use Challenger as your prime as well to get the Die Hard trait, but I don't like the die, so I'm going with Alchemist, but feel free to swap these around as well. The gear itself is pretty cookie cutter in my opinion, but I'm going to discuss it all anyway. The armor set is really just what I could use to fit the most armor on a build and still be in medium weight. I'm using this for most of the area clears in Apocalypse because I'm going to be taking some damage, so I'm going to want some defenses for sure. I have another set with 0 weight for boss fights because technically I like to do the no-hit boss fights, and if you're doing that, armor and defenses mean nothing. But yeah, 2 armor sets. The relic I'm using is Tranquil Heart because I want passive HP regen in case I take a hit or just get put on fire or something like that. Plus, it'll allow me to slowly heal even if a boss has empathy or anything. But again, you're free to choose whatever relic you want. Nothing else is really going to help here. You can also run Quilted Heart if you want to run infinite stamina through that, but then you're going to have to change some other pieces of gear around. But also, a special note on the Tranquil Heart here is that because it has active regen on it, you can also run Anastasia's Ring to have permanent haste, which is also very nice for melee builds. The amulet I'm using is Butcher's Fetish because we're going to be using charged melee a lot. So 15% crit and 25% crit damage is very good because it's going to have pretty much 100% uptime. But there are some other options that are usable as well. Whetstone technically does more damage, so if you want to maintain that with bleeds with, grenades or the melee bleed ring, you can easily do that and sustain that 100%. Matriarch's Insignia is also very strong just because it has a lot of flat damage on it. I don't particularly like Decayed Margin as the 3% base damage leech is very low for how slow melee swings, and it also does not apply to melee dots like it did in Remnant 1, so I'm not going to recommend that. So for the rings, I'm going to be using Berserker's Crest for that increased melee charge speed, because like Butcher's Fetish, we're going to be doing a lot of charged melee attacks. And then we're going to go right into the standard crit stacking rings with Burden of the Gambler and Probability Cord. The last ring slot is kind of up to you. I'm using Bisected Ring for infinite stamina to sustain the charged melee swings, but you can easily work around that and then instead run Akari Warband for even more crit damage, which is probably more optimal. You just run like Quilted Heart or some stamina regen traits or something else. I'm sure you can manage stamina just fine without this. And then for my bossing setup, I'm going to be using the Flyweight Sting for 25% melee damage on 0 weight. And then for the weapons, we actually have a lot of things to choose from. Luckily here in Remnant 2, you have a lot of good melee weapons. And I don't want to discuss every single melee weapon right now, I'm just going to talk about the 2 I'm using most frequently. And of course, we're not using ranged weapons, and we're just using like some slow mods for elites, so we're not going to talk about any of that. But anyway, World's Edge. This is my preferred melee weapon of choice for zone clearing, because the charge attack penetrates through walls and can easily stagger lock most normal and elite enemies. And since we have infinite stamina, it makes for easy clearing. World's Edge also has the added benefit of being able to hit bosses at ranged with relatively little accuracy. World's Edge has an 80% stagger modifier as well, so even some bosses you can slap around and kind of stagger lock them to a degree. The other weapon I'm using for bosses that are on the ground is Stonebreaker, which is easily the best melee weapon in the game. The main difference between World's Edge and Stonebreaker is that Stonebreaker has full damage on the melee charge swing, as well as the shockwave that comes out, allowing you to get basically 2 hits in at point blank range. Whereas World Edge still has the damage penalty to their weapon swing on charged melee attacks like it had in Remnant 1. So yeah, they each have their uses, and you can pick your weapons accordingly. And you're free to use other melee weapons such as Krell's Axe, Hero's Sword, Feral Judgment, Atom Splitter. There's a lot of good options like I mentioned. And since we're using crit stacking for this build, we're going to be using the Overdrive Mutator for our melee weapon. This grants us 25% crit chance and 45% crit damage when it's fully activated. Also, very juicy damage multiplicative modifiers. For the traits, kinda weird to be honest. If you want to no-hit bosses, you need absolutely no defenses, but for more general clearing and effectiveness, you're going to want to use things like Fortify and Bark Skin for damage reduction, which is very useful in melee range. Swiftness is a no-brainer. You always want swiftness, get that move speed. And then I'm also running 10 Vigor and 10 Expertise because again, those are pretty much mandatory in Apocalypse unless again you're trying to do no-hit bosses. I don't have any stamina management traits as we're going to be using the Bisected Ring, but again, you can easily just manage your stamina with concoctions and traits and then use another ring if you want. And then you get your 25% more damage reduction by not using Bisected Ring. And lastly, I put points into Untouchable because iframes are good. Sadly, Amplitude does not work for melee attacks that generate effects like World's Edge and Stonebreaker, so sad face there. And since there's not really any useful mods for melee, we're not going to be using Arcane Strike either. The best we can do is use slows, which don't affect bosses anyways, and so we only really need the mods for elites. That's the whole melee build though. Overall, it works pretty well and clears quite comfortably. Of course, this isn't a DPS king or anything, we're not Hugs, but as I mentioned before in my Hugs video, there are plenty of builds like this one that will still perform just fine on Apocalypse, as long as you're not trying to get min-max damage or kill times. Melee damage is very strong regardless, and it'll be even better once Invader gets patched. So don't be afraid of melee builds guys, it's still fantastic. But thank you all for watching, and thank you to my Patreon members, I always appreciate you guys. If anyone wants to talk shop about Remnant or gaming in general, feel free to join my Discord in the description below. But yeah, thanks, good luck out there, peace.